The Amarna period stands as one of the most unique chapters in ancient Egyptian history, a time when everything seemed to change. It was a period marked by dramatic breaks from centuries of tradition. Everything that was new, whether in architecture or daily life, was driven by one goal: to honor and support a revolutionary new belief system. This belief system, known as Atenism, was introduced by Pharaoh Akhenaten in the 14th century BC. At its core, it was a solar theology designed to usurp the traditional Egyptian pantheon with a single governing principle, the Aten, with no other more important than him. While the Aten was symbolized by the sun disk in art, it's important to note that this wasn't the worship of the sun in the way we might think. Akhenaten's new religion emphasized the object of devotion as being the light that is contained within the disk. Therefore, what we see as a rayed sun disk prevalent almost everywhere in Amarna art is not an icon of worship, but in fact a large-scale hieroglyph for light. Atenism didn't just redefine religion, it redefined time itself. The religion emphasized the daily cycle of the Aten, rising at dawn to recreate the world, then disappearing under the horizon at dusk, only to rise again the next morning. This view placed a huge importance on the present moment, a dramatic shift from traditional Egyptian thinking, which is more concerned with eternity. You can see this shift reflected in the way things were done during Akhenaten's reign. For example, writing was adapted to mirror the spoken language, making it more immediate and practical. Even the construction of buildings was revolutionized. The new technique, known as talalat, used smaller stones that one worker could easily handle, speeding up construction. This method made it possible to rapidly build Akhenaten's new capital, Ankhesenamun, or what we now call Amarna. Some early scholars thought of Atenism as a more scientific religion, focusing on what could be seen and understood rather than the mysterious and hidden realms of the gods, which had been the focus of traditional Egyptian religion. Akhenaten's temples reflected this shift. Unlike the shadowy, closed-off temples of the past, the new temples were bathed in sunlight, open to the air, with roofless courtyards and doorways that invited the rays of the Aten to fill the space. It was a religion that seemed to embrace the visible world, rather than retreat into the hidden and mysterious. But here's the twist. While Atenism seemed more open and accessible, it was, in fact, more exclusive and hierarchical than anything Egypt had seen before. In the art of Amarna, the Aten's rays are shown reaching down not to the people, but to Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti. This visual clue tells us something crucial. Akhenaten and Nefertiti were the only ones allowed to communicate directly with the Aten. They were the intermediaries between the god and the people. In fact, texts like, quote, "There is no other who knows you except your son, Neferkeperure, Wa Enre, or Akhenaten," suggests that only the royal couple understood the true way to worship the Aten. For everyone else, the path to the god lay through images of the king, queen, or their children. Under Akhenaten's rule, the old gods were replaced by the royal family, elevating them to divine status. What makes the Amarna period especially fascinating, however, is the role of its royal women. Unlike any other time in Egyptian history, the women of Akhenaten's court, especially Nefertiti and her daughters, became central figures in both politics and religion. Because the city of Amarna was largely abandoned and forgotten after Akhenaten's death, much of the artwork and texts from this period survived intact. The result? More information has come down to us about the royal women of Amarna than about all the other queens and princesses of Egypt combined. This gives us a rare and intimate look into their lives, their power, and their mysterious roles. Among the surviving images and stories, we encounter a queen who is depicted smiting her enemies, an act traditionally reserved for pharaohs. We see princesses whose beauty seems almost otherworldly, and we follow the mysterious disappearance of a minor queen who left no trace behind. These women were not just figures of beauty, they were powerful, complex, and at the heart of a revolutionary time in Egyptian history. And so, here are the stories of the royal women of Amarna, their triumphs, tribulations, and the legacy they left behind. When Akhenaten was born, he grew up surrounded by some incredibly powerful women. There was his mother, Queen Tiye, and his sisters, the daughters of Amenhotep III. But it was Tiye who truly stood out. Though she wasn't born into royalty, Tiye came from a prominent family. Her father, Kiya, held the title of God's father and was the commander of the chariotry. Her mother, Tuya, was a priestess of Min. So while Tiye didn't have royal blood, she quickly became a force to be reckoned with in the royal court. As the great royal wife of Amenhotep III, Tiye wasn't just a queen in title. She was a key advisor and confidant to the king, playing a pivotal role in both the political and religious life of Egypt. Her influence was so great that she's depicted alongside her husband in monuments and tombs all over the country, often shown equal in size to Amenhotep III. This wasn't just for show. It symbolized her substantial power and authority, especially when it came to diplomacy and governance during Egypt's 18th dynasty. Tiye's influence didn't stop at Egypt's borders, though. She became an important figure on the international stage, securing peace and forging alliances. Foreign leaders often turned to her for advice on matters of stability and diplomacy. In fact, at one point, she was even worshipped as a living goddess at the Temple of Sidenga in Nubia. Her reach stretched across the ancient world, with correspondence maintained between her and the kings of Mitanni, Babylon, and the Hittites. Tiye was known for leading the charge in negotiating marriages, alliances, and peace treaties, showing a diplomatic skill that made her indispensable. There's also a theory that Tiye's father, Kiya, may not have been Egyptian. Some Egyptologists point to the features of his mummy and the unusual spelling of his name as evidence that he could have had foreign roots. If true, this would explain why Tiye was so adept at handling international relations. She may have had a broader, more cosmopolitan worldview that helped her navigate the political intricacies of the ancient world. Even after Amenhotep III's death, Tiye's influence didn't fade. When Akhenaten, her son, ascended the throne, foreign rulers still turned to her for advice on matters of state. Letters from these foreign monarchs show that they respected her counsel even after her husband's passing, acknowledging her as a key player in maintaining international peace. When Akhenaten introduced his radical religious changes, moving the court to the newly founded city of Ankhesenamun, or what we now call Amarna, Tiye didn't fade into the background. On the contrary, she maintained a prominent presence. In the new capital, Tiye was even given her own temple, a sunshade temple dedicated to the Aten, the sun god. These temples, often linked to royal women, were sanctuaries where daily offerings were made to the Aten. The presence of lush gardens and pools symbolized a connection between nature and the divine, underscoring Tiye's important role in Akhenaten's revolutionary religious framework. In many ways, Tiye was one of the most powerful queens Egypt ever saw. Her influence was unparalleled, and she wielded authority that few women in history could match. Whether during Amenhotep III's reign or the dramatic changes under Akhenaten, Tiye's guidance, wisdom, and diplomatic skill played a crucial role in shaping the course of the Amarna period. Her legacy as a powerful and influential queen is still remembered to this day. Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, is far more than just an iconic face from ancient Egypt. As Akhenaten's chief wife, she is one of the most famous figures of the Amarna period and remains one of the most recognizable images from ancient Egypt, thanks largely to the stunning bust discovered in the 1920s. But behind her famous portrait lies a fascinating mystery about who she really was. Some think she may have been the Mitanni princess Tadukepa, as her name suggests foreign roots, but this seems unlikely as foreign wives rarely adopted Egyptian names, let alone rise to become the chief wife of the pharaoh. And there's another clue. Historical records mention a sister, Mutnejmet, which makes the idea of Nefertiti being a foreigner even less likely. It's a bit of a shame, really, that Nefertiti is so often reduced to just her beauty. When you dig into her story, a whole new picture of a powerful, complex woman begins to emerge. Nefertiti likely married Akhenaten, then known as Amenhotep IV, when she was in her mid-teens, not long after she reached puberty. Before Nefertiti stepped onto the scene, Queen Tiye, Akhenaten's mother, had been fulfilling the duties of chief wife. But as Akhenaten's reign shifted towards religious and artistic revolution, Nefertiti's role began to evolve. At first, she was portrayed in the more traditional style of art seen under Amenhotep III, but over time, her image slowly morphed into the new, radical Amarna style that Akhenaten introduced. In fact, her portrayal transitioned from traditional to semi-Amarna, and eventually, she fully embraced the new and revolutionary artistic language of the Amarna-style artwork that we've come to know. As her image changed, so did her power. Early on, she may have seemed like a typical queen, but over time, her influence grew, placing her on a level not seen since the reign of Hatshepsut. Art from this period shows her nearly equal in size to Akhenaten, a clear indication of her immense power, though she was still, of course, never above him. But how did she attain this level of authority? It likely had to do with the radical religious changes Akhenaten brought to Egypt. In his new vision, Aten was above all other gods, but the only ones who could communicate directly with him were Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Together they formed a divine trio with Aten at the center, rooted in the ancient Egyptian concept of creation. In this belief, Aten, the creator god, and his two children, Shu, Akhenaten, and Tefnut, Nefertiti, worked together to bless humanity. This belief gave Nefertiti an incredibly elevated role, allowing her to interact directly with the god, either alongside Akhenaten or eventually on her own. You can see this in the art from the period, where she's shown making offerings to Aten with Akhenaten and sometimes by herself, or even worshipping with her daughters behind her. But here's a striking moment. There's a relief that shows her smiting an enemy, an act usually reserved for male pharaohs. Nefertiti's role as queen was groundbreaking. She not only held power in a way few queens had before her, but she also broke gender norms, transcending what was expected of royal women at the time. In the Great Hymn to the Aten, a sacred poem likely sung in Akhenaten's court, it seems that while Akhenaten was their intermediary for Aten on earth, Nefertiti acted as his female counterpart, balancing his masculinity with her own femininity. I would argue that both the king and the queen, at a certain point, reach a state where they are indiscernible from one another. The divine androgyny seems to depict both Nefertiti and Akhenaten as one figure with one identity. This idea is further supported by a relief representing the king with the queen's profile subtly behind his own, in striking similarity. After Akhenaten's death, records start to mention two new rulers, Ankheperure Mary Neferkeperure and Neferuaten Mary Enre. For a long time, scholars thought these names referred to Smenkhare, Akhenaten's possible successor, but eventually in 2012, an archaeologist working near Amarna found a graffito, a text carved on the wall in year 16 of Akhenaten's reign. On the graffito was Nefertiti's name, confirmation that she had survived her husband and was still living alongside him until death. Previously, archaeologists had believed that she passed away around year 12 of his reign, so this was a historical breakthrough. Not only had she survived, but it is most likely that she had succeeded her husband as Neferuaten. Akhenaten had previously appointed Smenkhare as co-regent to aid him in governing the land, as well as to guarantee succession. Smenkhare is a mysterious figure in the Amarna records, and there are many more questions left unanswered about who he was. However, one thing that is certain is that he was appointed as Akhenaten's co-regent for a short time before dying. A few years after his death, Akhenaten then appointed Neferuaten, who was probably Nefertiti. What's especially interesting is that her rise as a co-regent may have been driven by a crisis, possibly linked to Akhenaten's radical changes to Egyptian society, which likely created enemies. Perhaps Akhenaten chose Nefertiti as a way of safeguarding his religious and governmental reforms, ensuring they would last even after his death. As we've seen in the art from her later years, Nefertiti's status rose significantly during the final years of Akhenaten's reign. By the end, she was appearing alongside him, depicted almost as a second king. This shift in her portrayal suggests that after her husband's death, Nefertiti, possibly under the name Neferuaten, took the reins as ruler of Egypt. While scholars still debate whether she lived independently or as a co-regent alongside the young Tutankhamun, there's evidence to suggest that Nefertiti did rule on her own for at least a few years before Tutankhamun assumed full control. Some theories propose that she co-ruled with him while he was too young to govern, though there's no strong evidence in terms of text or artwork to support this. What is intriguing, however, is that when we look at Neferuaten's reign, we see a significant shift in policy. It appears that she took steps to reverse many of Akhenaten's radical changes. For instance, she played a pivotal role in restoring the cult of Amun. A graffito from her reign, dated to year 3, third month of the inundation, day 10, gives us valuable insight. It reads, "The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, lord of the two lands, Ankheperure, beloved of Aten, the son of Ra, Neferuaten, beloved of Enra, giving worship to Amun, kissing the ground to when in Nefer by the priest, in the mansion of Ankh in Thebes." This text is crucial because it shows that Neferuaten not only restored Amun's worship, but also established her own temple in the city of Waset, or Thebes, which had suffered during Akhenaten's reign when he shut down Amun's temples in favor of the Aten. Akhenaten had even fired Amun's priests and redirected resources to support the Aten cult. Why Nefertiti chose to reverse her husband's policies remain unclear, but it's possible she understood how unpopular Akhenaten had become because of these moves. Maybe she saw that continuing the attacks on Amun would only fuel further unrest. It's also possible that she wanted to establish herself as a more open and benevolent ruler, in stark contrast to Akhenaten's more rigid approach. What's important to note is that while she restored Amun's worship, Nefertiti didn't abandon her worship of the Aten. Her title, as recorded in the graffito, still acknowledges her as beloved of Aten, indicating that she likely still held true to her husband's religious reforms. But she also understood the need to find a balance. both to appease the people and to bring back the influential priestly classes. It wasn't until the reign of Tutankhamun, though, that the full reversal of Akhenaten's policies took place. Over time, Akhenaten and his court, including Nefertiti, were purposefully erased from history, with later rulers branding Akhenaten as a heretic. Nefertiti's brief reign, whether independent or as co-regent, seems to mark the final chapter of the Amarna period. If it's true that Nefertiti chose to rule on her own, it's possible that her decision upset powerful figures within the court. Some even speculate that her life may have been taken as a result of her actions. Whatever the case, her role in the final days of the Amarna period is a fascinating and pivotal moment in ancient Egyptian history. Nefertiti's time on Earth, though brief, was filled with power and intrigue. As Akhenaten's great wife, she played a crucial role in shaping the revolutionary Aten religion, influencing the art and customs that define the Amarna period. New theories supporting her role as a co-regent and even a pharaoh reveal a woman who is not just a beautiful figurehead, but a powerful and transformative leader in her own right. Her legacy endures through her timeless bust, but her story is one of complexity, influence, and mystery. A true architect of Egypt's most radical era. Kiya is undoubtedly one of the most intriguing and mysterious figures from the Amarna period. Her sudden and deliberate omission from historical records just 3 years before Akhenaten's death has sparked many theories and controversies. Who was this other wife of Akhenaten, and what really happened to her? Though Kiya wasn't as prominent as Nefertiti, she held a special place in court. She was depicted in artwork, often shown alongside the royal family, signaling her important role at court. Yet despite her clear significance, details about her life remain elusive. What we do know hints at a life filled with intrigue, and perhaps controversy, leading to her eventual fall from favor with Akhenaten. One of the biggest mysteries is Kiya's origins. Some scholars think she was a Mitanni princess who adopted an Egyptian name after marrying Akhenaten. Despite evidence indicating she was not Egyptian by birth, she was still described as a wife and great beloved of the king in inscriptions, underscoring her significance to Akhenaten. She's also thought to be the noble lady mentioned in some Amarna inscriptions, though we can't be certain. Kiya's position at court wasn't insignificant. Like Tiye and Nefertiti, she was honored with sunshade sanctuaries dedicated to the Aten, the sun god, and had side chapels of her own. These were typically granted to female royals and came with land, estates, and income to support their status. There's also evidence suggesting she had at least one daughter with Akhenaten, though the child's name is lost to history. And while some speculate that Kiya could have been Tutankhamun's mother, there's no solid evidence to support this theory. Kiya remained largely unknown until 1959, when her name was discovered on 2 cosmetic containers, one in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the other in the British Museum. Since then, archaeologists have uncovered more references to her. The British Egyptologists Aidan Dodson and Diane Hilton wrote, "Kiya is named and depicted on various blocks originating at Amarna, on vases in London and New York, 4 fragmentary coal tubes in Berlin and London, and a wine jar docket. She may also be depicted by 3 uninscribed sculptors' studies. Her coffin and canopic jars were taken over for the burial of the king, probably Smenkhare, which was ultimately discovered in tomb KV55 in the Valley of the King." Almost all of Kiya's monuments were usurped for daughters of Akhenaten, making it fairly certain that she was disgraced sometime after year 11 of Akhenaten's reign. Kiya's disappearance during Akhenaten's last years coincides with her name and figure being erased from monuments, having been replaced almost entirely with those of Nefertiti's daughter, Meritaten. Egyptologists interpret this eradication of her legacy as a sign of disgrace. However, it is also possible she died. It is interesting to note that funerary objects originally meant for Kiya, including her canopic jars, as well as elaborate sarcophagus, were reused and repurposed for others. We can tell in particular with the gilded wooden coffin found in Tomb KV55 in the Valley of the Kings. Here we can recognize in the wording of the Atenist prayer that it was originally intended for a woman, and later revised by replacing the inscribed gold foil with Kiya's name and titles with that of Pharaoh Smenkhare. Whatever happened to Kiya, the fact that her burial equipment was reused, alongside her name and image being written out of existence, indicate that she was disgraced or exiled from court, as it seems like a harsh thing to do to someone still in your favor. Despite some fantastical theories suggesting Kiya was overthrown in a coup led by a jealous Nefertiti, or banished due to the deteriorating relationship between Egypt and the Mitanni, one thing is for certain: Kiya, against all odds, managed to survive death in obscurity. Arguably the most represented of all the royal daughters, Meritaten, whose name means beloved of the Aten, was the firstborn of Nefertiti and Akhenaten. She may have been born before Akhenaten ascended to the throne, as she's depicted officiating ceremonies as early as his 5th regnal year. In these scenes, she's shown as a small figure wearing a long adult gown, holding a sistrum, suggesting that she was likely born around regnal year 2 or 3. The news of Meritaten's birth was celebrated far and wide. Letters from foreign rulers congratulated Akhenaten on his firstborn, including one from the king of Babylon, Burnaburiash, who sent a stunning necklace adorned with lapis lazuli crickets, intricately carved gemstones that showcase both wealth and artistry. In numerous reliefs, Meritaten is the focal point of her parents' affections. While displays of intimacy were common in the revolutionary Amarna art style, Meritaten stands out. She often appears alone, with Akhenaten and Nefertiti in monuments and reliefs. One striking relief shows her seated behind her parents as they distribute gifts from a royal window, highlighting her importance as the eldest daughter. Artistic depictions consistently emphasize her closeness to Akhenaten. In one shrine stela, he lovingly cradles baby Meritaten, lifting her to his face for a kiss, a rare, tender portrayal that speaks volumes about their bond. As Akhenaten's reign progressed, her prominence grew. After the fall or death of Kiya, the lesser wife, Meritaten's name replaced Kiya's on monuments, and even Kiya's distinctive wig was altered to reflect Meritaten's style. Eventually, Meritaten was elevated to the role of king's chief wife, with her name inscribed within a royal cartouche, a title traditionally reserved for queens. Later, she married Akhenaten's co-regent, Smenkhare, though he tragically died soon after ascending to power. Following Akhenaten's death, when Neferu-Aten, possibly Nefertiti herself, took the throne, Meritaten retained her role as chief wife, though seemingly more in ceremonial and religious contexts than in domestic life, considering Nefertiti was her mother. Despite her prominence during the Amarna period, little is known about Meritaten's final years, her fate, or her burial. Yet her image endures through the art and artifacts of Amarna. Striking quartzite heads found in the workshop of the famed sculptor Thutmose may represent Meritaten and her sisters, Meketaten and Ankhesenamun. These sculptures are notable for their elongated crania and shaved heads, leading to various interpretations. Some suggest a medical condition like hydrocephalus, but it's more likely these features were exaggerated, emphasize hereditary traits or religious symbolism. The baldness, unusual given that princesses typically wore side locks, may have been a deliberate artistic choice. It may indicate the youngest daughter, however. Shaved heads were also associated with purification rites and priestly status, possibly highlighting the princess's divine roles. The elongated shape, reminiscent of an egg, aligns with Egyptian symbolism, where the egg represents cosmic creation, a fitting motif given Akhenaten's belief as the son of the Aten. Meritaten was more than just a typical royal daughter. She was a central figure in Akhenaten's radical religious revolution. Her depictions alongside her parents in key ceremonial roles illustrate her significance within this new theological framework. As the firstborn of the living embodiments of Shu and Tefnut, Meritaten, alongside her sisters, can be seen as living representations of divine creation itself. Finally, let's talk about two of the lesser-known but deeply compelling daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, Meketaten and Ankhesenamun. Meketaten, whose name means "she whom the Aten protects," was the second daughter of Nefertiti and Akhenaten. We actually see her quite a bit in the tomb reliefs at Amarna. She's often shown in these warm, intimate family scenes, holding hands with her parents, standing beside her sisters, all bathed in the rays of the Aten. But then, almost without warning, she disappears from the historical record. Her last appearance is heartbreaking. It shows what looks like a funerary scene in the royal tomb at Amarna, and that's all we really have. What happened to her? We're not sure. Some scholars think she may have died in childbirth. Others point to a plague that may have swept through Egypt at the time. Whatever the cause, her life was short, but she was clearly woven deeply into the heart of her father's radical vision and into the world of the Amarna court. And then there's Ankhesenamun, arguably the most enigmatic of all the Amarna daughters. She was born Ankhesenamun, which means her life is of the Aten, and like her sisters, she was raised in the shadow of her father's dramatic religious revolution. But after Akhenaten died and the Amarna experiment unraveled, she re-emerged with a new name, Ankhesenamun, a name that signaled Egypt's return to its old gods. She married her half-brother, the boy king Tutankhamun, when they were both still children. It was probably a strategic move, an attempt to stabilize the royal family during a chaotic time. But their reign was short. Tutankhamun died suddenly at just 18, and Ankhesenamun was left alone, and very likely in danger. We know this because she did something truly extraordinary. She wrote a letter to a foreign king, the ruler of the Hittites, and asked him to send one of his sons for her to marry. That might not sound shocking today, but for an Egyptian queen to reach out to a foreign power like that, unheard of. It tells us how desperate and isolated she must have felt. The Hittite prince was sent, but he never made it. He was murdered along the way, probably by someone at the Egyptian court who didn't want a foreigner on the throne. After that, Ankhesenamun vanishes from history, and we don't know what happened to her. And so we're left with fragments, shards of names, broken statues, and fading inscriptions. Women who once walked the halls of power, bathed in the divine light of the Aten, now half-remembered echoes in history. Kiya, the beloved wife who vanished, her image scraped from the walls, her body likely cast aside, her memory all but erased. Meritaten, the radiant firstborn, rising in prominence as her father's world crumbled, crowned queen and then, like her mother, lost to time. Meketaten, the daughter wrapped in love, mourned in the royal tomb before she ever had a chance to live a full life. And Ankhesenamun, the girl who became a queen, then a widow, reaching beyond Egypt's borders in a desperate bid for survival, only to disappear into silence. They were daughters, consorts, queens, and symbols of a revolution that promised a new world, but delivered instability, grief, and eventual erasure. Yet even in their obscurity, they endure. In shattered reliefs, in letters etched in foreign archives, in coffins reused and sanctuaries forgotten, their stories still flicker like sunlight through broken stone. In the end, they remind us of a truth that transcends centuries, that power is never permanent, that memory is fragile, and that even in the brightest light, shadows remain.